Systems of the human body, nerve system, components, brain, spinal cord, nerves, and special sense organs such as eyes and ears. Function generates action potentials or nerve impulses to regulate body activities, detects changes in the body's internal and external environment, interprets the changes, and responds by causing muscular contractions or glandular secretions. Later, endocrine system, components, hormone producing organs, pineal gland, hypothalamus, thyroid gland, parathyroid gland, adrenal gland, pancreas, ovaries, and testes, and hormone producing cells in several other organs. Functions regulates body activities by releasing hormones, which are chemical messengers transported in blood from an endocrine gland to the target organ. Cardiovascular system components include blood, heart, heat, and blood vessels. Heart. Heart pumps blood through blood vessels. Blood carries oxygen and nutrients to cells, and carbon dioxide and wastes away from cells, and helps regulate acid-base balance, temperature, and water content of body fluids. Blood components help defend against disease and mend damaged blood vessels. Then respiratory system components, lungs and air passages such as the pharynx or voice box, trachea, windpipe, and bronchial tubes leading into and out of them. Functions: transfers oxygens from inhaled air to blood, carbon dioxide from blood to exhaled air, helps regulate acid-base balance of body fluids, air flowing out of lungs through vocal cords produce sounds. Digestive system, organs of gastrointestinal tract, a long tube that includes the mouth, pharynx, throat, esophagus, stomach, small and large intestine, and anus. Also include accessory organs that assist in digestive process such as salivary glands, liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. Functions such as physical and chemical breakdown of food, absorbs nutrients, eliminates solid wastes. Urinary system components include kidneys, ureters, urinary bladder, and urethra. Functions: produces, stores, and eliminates urine, eliminates wastes, and regulates volume and chemical composition of blood, helps maintain the acid-base balance of body fluids, maintains body's mineral balance, helps regulate production of red blood cells. Then reproductive systems, components, gonads, testes in males, and ovaries in females, and associated organs like uterine tubes, uterus and vagina in females, and epididymis, ductus deferens, and penis in males. Gonads produce gametes, spermatozoites, that unite to form a new organism. Gonads also release hormones that regulate reproduction and other body processes. Associated organs transport and store gametes. Nerve system, organization of the nerve system. Nerve system coordinate and control the activities of the animals. The two main subdivisions of the nerve system are the central nerve system, which consists of the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nerve system, or PNS, which includes all nerve tissues outside the CNS. Components of the PNS include cranial nerves and their branches, spinal nerves and their branches, ganglia, and sensory receptors. The PNS may be subdivided further into a somatic nerve system, or SNS, somatic nerve system. The SNS consists of neurons that conduct impulses from somatic and special sense receptors to the CNS, and motor neurons from the CNS to skeletal muscles. The action of SNS is voluntary. Next, an autonomic nerve system, or ANS. The autonomic nerve system consists of sensory neurons that convey information from autonomic sensory receptors. Just once again read this. Organization of the nerve system. Nerve system coordinate and control the activities of the animals. The two main subdivisions of the nerve system are the central nerve system, which consists of brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nerve system, which include all nerve tissue outside the central nerve system. Components of the peripheral nerve system include cranial nerves and their branches, spinal nerves and their branches, ganglia, and sensory receptors. The peripheral nerve system may be subdivided further into somatic nerve system. The somatic nerve system consists of neurons that conduct impulses from somatic and special sense receptors to the CNS, and motor neurons from the CNS to skeletal muscles. How is that? The SNS consists of neurons that conduct impulses from somatic and special sense receptors to the central nervous system and motor neurons from the central nervous system to skeletal muscles. The action of central nervous system is voluntary. And autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system consists of sensory neurons that convey information from autonomic sensory receptors, motor neurons that conduct nerve impulses from the central nervous system to smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. Because its motor response are not normally under conscious control, the action of the ANS is involuntary. The motor part of the ANS consists of two branches, the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. With a few exceptions, effectors receive nerves from both divisions, and usually the two divisions have opposing actions. For example, sympathetic nerves increase heart rate and parasympathetic neurons slow it down. In general, the sympathetic division helps support exercise or emergency action, so-called flight or fight response, fight or flight response, and the parasympathetic division takes care of rest and digest activities. Fight or flight, rest and digest activities. Next, the enteric nervous system. The enteric nervous system consists of nerves in enteric plexus in the gastrointestinal tract that function somewhat independently of the central nervous systems and autonomous nervous system. The ENS monitors sensory changes in the controls operation of the GI tract. So here we could see a picture which depicts organization of the nervous system. Subdivisions of the peripheral nervous systems are the somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system and enteric nervous system. So SNS or somatic and special sensory receptors and neurons, CNS, brain and spinal cord, into that autonomic sensory receptors and neurons, sensory receptors and neurons in GI tract and enteric plexus. Later, the CNS transforms to somatic motor neurons, voluntary, skeletal muscle, autonomic motor neurons, involuntary, sympathetic and parasympathetic division, to smooth muscle, cardiac muscle and glands. Then enteric motor neurons, involuntary in enteric plexus, motor parts of PNS, smooth muscle, glands and endocrine cells of GI tract or effectors. Enteric motor neurons, involuntary in enteric plexus, smooth muscle, glands and endocrine cells of GI tract. These are the effectors. Histology of nerve tissue. Nerve tissue consists of two types of cells, neurons and neuroglia. Neurons provide most of the unique functions of the nervous system, such as sensing, thinking, remembering, controlling muscle activity and regulating glandular secretions. Neuroglia supports, nourishes and protects the neurons. First, about neurons. Neurons or nerve cells possess electrical excitability, the ability to respond to a stimulus and convert it into an action potential. A stimulus is any change in the environment that is strong enough to initiate an action potential. An action potential or nerve impulse is an electrical signal that propagates or travels along the surface of the membrane of a neuron. Nerve impulses travel at speeds ranging from 0.5 to 130 meters per second. Parts of neuron. Most neurons have three parts: cell body, dendrites and an axon. The cell body or perikaryon contains a nucleus surrounded by cytoplasm that includes typical cellular organelles such as lysosomes, mitochondria and a Golgi complex. Neuronal cell bodies also contain free ribosomes. Wait a minute, which are the parts? The cell body or perikaryon contains a nucleus surrounded by cytoplasm that includes typical cellular organelles such as lysosomes, mitochondria, and a Golgi complex. Neuronal cell bodies also contain free ribosomes and prominent clusters of rough endoplasmic reticulum termed Nissl bodies. A nerve fiber is a general term for any neuronal process or extension that emerges from the cell body of a neuron. Cell body perikaryon contains a nucleus surrounded by cytoplasm that includes typical cellular organelles such as lysosomes, mitochondria and Golgi complex. Neuronal cell bodies also contain free ribosomes and prominent clusters of rough endoplasmic reticulum called Nissl bodies. Just remember the spelling, NISSL bodies. So, a nerve fiber is a general term for any neuronal process or extension that emerges from the cell body of a neuron. Most neurons have two kinds of processes, multiple dendrites and a single axon. Dendrites are the receiving or input portions of a neurons. They usually are short, tapering and highly branched. A nerve fiber is a general term for any neuronal process or extension that emerges from a cell body of a neuron. Most neurons have two kinds of processes, multiple dendrites and a single axon. Dendrites are the receiving or input portions for a neuron. They usually are short, tapering and highly branched. A single axon of a neuron propagates nerve impulses towards another neuron, a muscle fiber or a gland cell. An axon is a long, thin cylindrical projection that often joins the cell body at a cone-shaped elevation called the axon hillock. An axon is a long, thin cylindrical projection that often joins the cell body at a cone-shaped elevation called the axon hillock. An axon contains mitochondria, microtubules, and neurofibrils. Because rough endoplasmic reticulum is not present, protein synthesis does not occur in the axon. The cytoplasm of an axon is called axoplasm and is surrounded by a plasma membrane known as the axolemma. Lemma in the sense sheet or husk. Along the length of an axon, side branches called axon collaterals may branch off, typically at a right angle to the axon. The axon and its collaterals end by dividing into many. The process is called axon terminals or telodendria. Just look at this picture of a basic neuron design. You could see regions called dendrites, then cell body or perikaryon is there, axon hillock region along with myelin sheath. We could see axon region, node of Ranvier. I'm not sure about the pronunciation of this Ranvier term, Ranvier. Okay. The site to communication between two neurons or between a neuron and an effector cell is called a synapse. We know that. So, structural diversity of neurons. Neurons display great diversity in size and shape. Structurally, neurons are classified according to the number of processes extending from the cell body. So, multipolar neurons. Structural diversity neurons. Neurons display great diversity in size and shape. Structurally, neurons are classified according to the number of processes extending from the cell body. Multipolar neurons usually have several dendrites and one axon. Most neurons in the brain and spinal cord are of this type. Then bipolar neurons have one main dendrite and one axon. They are found in the retina of the eye, in the inner ear, and in the olfactory area of the brain. Then unipolar neurons are sensory neurons that begin in the embryo as bipolar neurons. During development, the axon and dendrite fuse into single process. Wait a minute. Multipolar neurons, we know what it is. Then bipolar neurons have one main dendrite and one axon. They are found in the retina of the eye, in the inner ear, and the olfactory area of the brain. Multipolar neurons have several dendrites and one axon. Most neurons in the brain and spinal cord are of multipolar type. Then bipolar neurons have one main dendrite and one axon. They are found in the retina of eye, in the inner ear, and in the olfactory area of the brain. Unipolar neurons are the sensory neurons that begin in the embryo as bipolar neurons. During development, the axon and dendrites fuse into a single process that divides into two branches, a short distance from the cell body. Both branches have the characteristic structure and function of an axon. Functionally, neurons are classified as afferent, sensory, efferent, motor, or interneuron mixed according to the direction in which they transmit impulses relative to the central nervous system. Afferent or sensory neurons carry impulses from peripheral sense receptors to the CNS. They usually have long dendrites and relatively short axons. Efferent or motor neurons transmit impulses from the CNS to effector organs such as muscles and glands. Efferent neurons usually have short dendrites and long axons. Interneurons are located entirely on the CNS, in which they form the connecting link between the efferent and afferent neurons. They have short dendrites and may have either a short or long axon. The neuroglia or glia makes up about half the volume of the central nervous system. Generally, neuroglia are smaller than neurons and they are 5 to 50 times more numerous. In contrast to neurons, glia do not generate or propagate action potentials and they can multiply and divide in the mature nervous system. In cases of injury or disease, neuroglia multiply to fill the spaces formerly occupied by neurons. Of the 6 types of neuroglia, 4 astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, microglia, and ependymal cells, which are the astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, microglia cells, oligodendrocytes, microglia, and ependymal cells. Just look at the spelling, pendymal cells. Ependymal cells are found only in the central nervous system. The remaining 2 cells, Schwann cells and satellite cells. Schwann cells and satellite cells are also some neuroglial cells. Schwann cells and satellite cells are present in the peripheral nervous system. Then myelination. Axon surrounded by a myelinated lipid and protein covering called the myelin sheath are said to be myelinated. The sheath electrically insulates the axon of a neuron and increases the speed of nerve impulses conduction. Axons without such a covering are said to be unmyelinated. Unmyelinated. 2 types of neuroglia produce myelin sheaths, Schwann cells in the PNS and oligodendrocytes in the CNS. 2 types of neuroglia produce myelin sheaths, Schwann cells in the PNS and oligodendrocytes in the CNS. Each Schwann cell wraps about 1 millimeter of a single axon's length by spiraling many times around the axon. Eventually, multiple layers of glial plasma membrane surround the axon, with the Schwann cell cytoplasm and nucleus forming the outermost layer. The inner portion, consisting of up to 100 layers of Schwann cell membrane, is the myelin sheath. Each Schwann cell wraps about 1 millimeter of a single axon's length by spiraling many times around the axon. Eventually, multiple layers of glial plasma membrane surround the axon, with the Schwann cell cytoplasm and nucleus forming the outermost layer. The inner portion, consisting of up to 100 layers of Schwann cell membrane, is the myelin sheath. The outer nucleated cytoplasm layer of Schwann cell, which encloses the myelin sheath, is the neurolemma sheath of Schwann. The neurolemma is found only around axons in the peripheral nervous system. Gapes in the myelin sheath are called nodes of Ramner, appear at intervals along the axon. Each Schwann cell wraps one axon segment between 2 nodes. The amount of myelin increases from birth to maturity, and its presence greatly increases the speed of nerve impulse conductor. So remember, the amount of myelin increases from birth to maturity, and its presence greatly increases the speed of nerve impulse conductor. Speed of conduction of nerve impulses is affected by 3 factors. Temperature, higher the temperature, the faster the speed. Axon diameter, larger the diameter, faster the speed. Myelin sheath, present only in vertebrates. Gray and white matter. White matter is composed primarily of myelinated axons. The whitish color of myelin gives white matter its name. The gray matter of the nerve system contains neuronal cell bodies. It has dendrites, unmyelinated axons, axon terminals, and neuroglia. It appears grayish rather than white because the nucleus bodies impart of gray color. White matter is composed primarily of myelinated axons. The whitish color of myelin gives white matter its name. The gray matter of the nerve system contains neuronal cell bodies. It has dendrites, unmyelinated axons, axon terminals, and neuroglia. It appears grayish rather than white because the nucleus bodies impart of gray color and there is little or no myelin in these areas. In the spinal cord, the white matter surrounds an inner core of gray matter is shaped like a butterfly or the letter H. In the brain, a thin shell of gray matter covers the surface of the largest portion of the brain, the cerebrum and cerebellum. The spinal cord is located within the vertebral cavity of the vertebral column. White matter is composed primarily of myelinated axons. The white color of myelin gives white matter its name. The gray matter of the nervous system contains neuronal cell bodies. It has dendrites, unmyelinated axons, axon terminals, and neuroglia. It appears grayish rather than white because the nucleal bodies impart of gray color, and there is little or no myelin in these areas. In the spinal cord, the white matter surrounds an inner core of gray matter is shaped like a butterfly or the letter H. In the brain, a thin shell of gray matter covers the surface of largest portion of the brain, the cerebrum and cerebellum. The spinal cord is located within the vertebral cavity of the vertebral column. Then meninges. The meninges are three connective tissue coverings that encircle the spinal cord and brain. The spinal meninges surround the spinal cord and are continuous with the radial meninges which encircle the brain. The outermost meninx is the dura mater that is composed of dense, irregular connective tissue. The middle meninx is a vascular covering called the arachnoid matter because of its spider web arrangement and delicate collagen fibers and some elastic fibers. The innermost meninx is the pia mater, not sure about the pronunciation, a thin transparent connective tissue layer that adheres to the surface of the spinal cord and brain. Between the arachnoid matter and the pia mater is the supraarachnoid space which contains cerebrospinal fluid. Then protective covering of the brain. The radium and the radial meninges surround and protect the brain. The radium and the radial meninges surround and protect the brain. The radial meninges are continuous with the spinal meninges, have the same basic structure and bear the same names: the outer dura mater, the middle arachnoid mater, and the inner pia mater. However, the cranial dura mater has two layers. The spinal dura mater has only one. Now we are going to learn about the brain organization. The brain and spinal cord develop from ectoderm arrangement in a tubular structure called the neural tube. Brain organization. The brain and spinal cord develop from ectodermal arrangement in a tubular structure called the neural tube. The anterior part of the neural tube expands and constrictions appear that create three regions called primary brain vesicles: prosencephalon or forebrain, mesencephalon, midbrain, and rhombencephalon or hindbrain. The mesencephalon gives rise to the midbrain and aqueduct of the midbrain. Both the prosencephalon and rhombencephalon subdivide further, forming secondary brain vesicles. The prosencephalon gives rise to telencephalon and diencephalon, and the rhombencephalon develops into the metencephalon and myelencephalon. Okay. Once again, three major parts: prosencephalon, mesencephalon, and rhombencephalon. Later, prosencephalon and rhombencephalon subdivide further. Prosencephalon and rhombencephalon. The prosencephalon or the forebrain part gives rise to telencephalon and diencephalon. Prosencephalon into telencephalon and diencephalon, and the rhombencephalon develops into the metencephalon and myelencephalon. Okay, meten and myelin. Okay, meten, myelencephalon. Prosencephalon into telencephalon and diencephalon. Okay, so the telencephalon develops into cerebrum and lateral ventricles. The diencephalon forms the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus, and metencephalon becomes the pons, cerebellum, and upper part of the fourth ventricle. Finally, the myelencephalon forms the medulla oblongata and lower part of the fourth ventricle. Once again, I will be repeating three parts: prosencephalon, mesencephalon, and rhombencephalon. Prosencephalon once again divide into telencephalon and diencephalon. This rhombencephalon divide into metencephalon and myelencephalon. Okay. So the telencephalon develops, which is produced with the help of prosencephalon. Remember that. The telencephalon develops into the cerebrum and lateral ventricles. Ventricles. The diencephalon forms the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus, and metencephalon, which is produced with the help of rhombencephalon, becomes the pons, cerebellum, and upper part of the fourth ventricle. Finally, the myelencephalon forms the medulla oblongata and lower part of the fourth ventricle. So when we try to learn about the development of brain, you could see this picture which depicts this process. Wall cavity. The first picture shown in the left side. No, in the right side is 5-week embryo. In the left side, you could see 3-4-week embryo. Okay. So 3-4-week embryo, wall cavity, prosencephalon, mesencephalon, and rhombencephalon. Later, prosencephalon divide into telencephalon, diencephalon. Mesencephalon, just mesencephalon. Okay. Then rhombencephalon divide into metencephalon and myelencephalon. This telencephalon creates cerebral hemispheres. Diencephalon creates thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. Mesencephalon, midbrain. Metencephalon, pons, cerebellum region. Myelencephalon, medulla region. In case of 5-week embryo. Cerebrospinal fluid, or a CSF, is a clear, colorless liquid that protects the brain and spinal cord from chemical and physical injuries. It also carries oxygen, glucose, and other needed chemicals from the brain to neurons and neuroglia. Oxygen, glucose, and other needed chemicals from the blood to neurons and neuroglia. CSF continuously circulates through cavities in the brain and spinal cord and surround the brain and spinal cord in the supraarachnoid space between the arachnoid matter and pia matter. Subarachnoid space between the arachnoid matter and pia matter. CSF filled cavities within the brain are called ventricles. Lateral ventricle is located in each hemisphere of the cerebrum. The third ventricle is a narrow cavity along the midline superior to the hypothalamus and between the right and left halves of the thalamus. The fourth ventricle lies between the brainstem and the cerebellum. So here we could see a picture, cavities of the brain. Lateral ventricles are there. Third ventricle is there. Aqueduct of the midbrain. Lateral ventricles. Third ventricle. Aqueduct of the midbrain. Upper part of the fourth ventricle. Lower part of the fourth ventricle. Lateral ventricles. Third ventricle. Aqueduct of the midbrain. Upper part of the fourth ventricle. Lower part of the fourth ventricle. These are the major cavities. CSF contains glucose, proteins, and lactic acid, urea, cations like Na+, K+, Ca2+, Mg2+, and anions. It also contains some white blood cells. Next, formation of CSF in the ventricles. The sites of CSF production are the choroids plexus. CSF production, choroids plexus. Networks of capillaries in the walls of the ventricles. The capillaries are covered by ependymal cells that form cerebrospinal fluid from blood plasma by filtration and secretion. The sites of CSF production are the choroids plexus. Never forget this. Choroids plexus. Networks of capillaries in the walls of the ventricles. Choroids plexus. The capillaries are covered by ependymal cells that form cerebrospinal fluid from blood plasma by filtration and secretion. Choroid plexus. Circulation of CSF. The CSF formed in the choroid plexus of each lateral ventricle flows into the third ventricle through two narrow oval openings, the oval in the sense. The intraventricular foramina. The interventricular foramina. More CSF is added by the choroids plexus in the roof of the third ventricle. The Fluid then flows through the aqueduct of the midbrain, cerebral aqueduct, which passes through the midbrain into the fourth ventricle. So first, the CSF is formed in the choroid's plexus of each lateral ventricle, flows into the third ventricle through two narrow oval openings called the interventricular foramina. More CSF is added by the choroid's plexus in the roof of the third ventricle. The fluid then flows through the aqueduct of the midbrain, cerebral aqueduct, which passes through the midbrain into the fourth ventricle. The choroid's plexus of the fourth ventricle contributes more fluid. CSF enters the subarachnoid space through three openings in the roof of the fourth ventricle, a median aperture and a paired lateral aperture, one on each side. CSF then circulates in the central canal of the spinal cord and in the supraarachnoid space around the surface of the brain and spinal cord. Major parts of the brain include forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. Forebrain consists of olfactory lobes, cerebrum, and diencephalon, and hindbrain consists of cerebellum, medulla oblongata, and pons. Cerebellum, diencephalon, and cerebrum, collectively known as brainstem. The brainstem is continuous with the spinal cord and consists of the medulla oblongata, pons, and midbrain. Posterior of the brainstem is the cerebellum. Superior to the brainstem is the diencephalons, which consist of the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. Supported on the diencephalons and brainstem is the cerebrum, the largest part of the brain. Forebrain, olfactory lobes are there. Olfactory lobes are paired, short, club-shaped structure present at the anterior part of the brain. Cavity in olfactory lobe is called rhinocele. A pair of olfactory nerve arise from the olfactory lobes. They are not well developed in human brains. Then cerebrum. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain and controls voluntary actions, speech, thought, and memory. The cerebrum is divided into two halves known as the right and left hemispheres. The mass of fibers called the corpus callosum links the hemispheres. The right hemisphere controls voluntary limb movements on the left side of the body, and the left hemisphere controls voluntary limb movements on the right side of the body. Each hemisphere is divided into four lobes or areas which are interconnected. The frontal lobe are located in the front of the brain and are responsible for voluntary movement, and via their connections with other lobes participate in the execution of sequential tasks, speech output, organizational skills, and certain aspects of behavior, mood, and memory. Frontal lobe. The parietal lobe are located behind the frontal lobe and in front of the occipital lobes. They process sensory information such as temperature, pain, taste, and touch. First, we learned about frontal lobes are located in the front of the brain and are responsible for voluntary movements, and via their connections with other lobes participate in the execution of sequential tasks, speech output, organizational skills, and certain aspects of behavior, mood, and memory. The parietal lobes are located behind the frontal lobes and in front of the occipital lobes. They possess sensory information such as temperature, pain, taste, and touch. In addition, the processing includes information about numbers, attentiveness to the positions of one's body parts, and space around one's body and one's relationship to this space. The temporal lobes are located on each side of the brain. They process memory and auditory hearing information and speech and language functions. The occipital lobes are located at the back of the brain. They receive and process visual information. The surface of each cerebral hemisphere shows many convulsions called gyri, separated by depressions called sulci. The cerebrum consists of two surfaces, cerebral cortex and cerebral medulla. Cerebral cortex is the outer layer of the cerebrum. It is made up of grey matter and contains many layers of nerve cells. The inner surface is called cerebral medulla, which is made up of bundles of myelinated axons, the white matter. Then diencephalon, it contains the epithalamus, thalamus, and hypothalamus. Epithalamus is non-nervous part which is fused with pia matter to form anterior choroid plexus. Thalamus directs sensory impulses from the lower parts of the brain and spinal cord to appropriate parts of the cerebrum. Limited sensory awareness of pain, temperature, touch, and pressure is provided by the thalamus. Hypothalamus, present just beneath the thalamus and forms the floor and part of the lateral walls of the third ventricle. It contains reflex centers linked to the autonomic system. They include thermoregulation center for temperature regulation, appetite and satiety center to control the desire for food, controls sleeping patterns and wakefulness. Hypothalamus secretes neurohormones which control the secretions of anterior pituitary hormone. It synthesizes the posterior pituitary hormone and control their release into the blood. Then midbrain. Midbrain is very small constricted portion of brain which is covered by the cerebrum. It is represented by a pair of longitudinal bands of nerve tissue, crura cerebri on ventral side, dorsally a pair of small swellings called corpora bigemina on either side. The four lobes or optic lobes are collectively called corpora quadrigemina, in which superior colliculi are related to optical activity, while the two smaller posterior colliculi to the auditory are collectively known as tectum. Next, hindbrain. Cerebellum is the second largest part of brain and is located at the back of the skull. It consists of a pair of cerebellar hemispheres and a small median vermis. The grey matter of cerebellum is called cerebellar cortex, while the white matter inside formed a branched tree-like structure called arbor vitae. Next, functions of cerebellum. It helps control body posture, maintains muscle tone, coordinate voluntary muscular activities and equilibrium of body. Then the pons region lies directly superior to the medulla and anterior to the cerebellum. Pons serves as a bridge between the midbrain and the medulla oblongata. The pons also contains a nuclei and fibers of nerves that serve eye muscle control, facial muscle strength and other functions. Then medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata is the lowest part of the brain stem and is interconnected with the cervical spinal cord. The medulla oblongata also helps control involuntary actions, including vital processes such as heart rate, blood pressure, and respiration. And it carries the corticospinal, that is motor function tract toward the spinal cord. Cerebrum we could see, corpus callosum region, then midbrain, cerebellum region, pons region, and medulla oblongata. So major parts of the human brain we try to learn: cerebrum region, corpus callosum, midbrain, cerebellum, pons, medulla oblongata. Next is about spinal cord. The spinal cord is an extension of the brain and is surrounded by the vertebral bodies that form the spinal column. The spinal cord is connected to a section of the brain called the brain stem. The central structures of the spinal cord are made up of grey matter, nerve cell bodies, and external and surrounding tissues are made up of white matter. External parts made up of white matter. Spinal cord conducts impulses to and from the brain and controls most of the reflex activities and provides a means of communication between spinal nerves and the brain. So when we try to learn about this, there is some major portions called peripheral nervous system, which we shortly represent as PNS. The nerves arising from the central nervous system constitute the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nervous system consists of somatic nervous system and an autonomic nervous system or visceral nervous system. Somatic nervous system or voluntary nervous system, it is constituted by the nerves which arise from the brain and the spinal cord. They are respectively called cranial and spinal nerves. Cranial nerves are 12 pairs in man. The central structures of the spinal cord are made up of grey matter, nerve cell bodies, and external and surrounding tissues are made up of white matter. So when we try to learn about its function, spinal cord conducts impulses to and from the brain and controls most of the reflex activities and provides a means of communication between spinal nerves and the brain. The nerves arising from the central nervous system constitute the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nervous system consists of somatic nervous system and autonomic or visceral nervous system. Somatic nervous system or voluntary nervous system, it is constituted by the nerves which arise from the brain and spinal cord. They are respectively called cranial or cerebral and spinal nerves. Cranial nerves are 12 pairs in man. types, origin and nature as well as functions are given below in the table. As there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves, all are mixed, sensory and motor, which are formed by the union of dorsal and ventral roots shortly after they leave the spinal cord. So olfactory, origin olfactory lobe or bulb, nature sensory, functions smell related. Then optic lobe on midbrain, nature sensory, then function sight, retina of eye. Then oculomotor, floor of midbrain, motor movement of eyeball, iris, lens, eyelid and constriction of pupil. Then trochlear region, floor of midbrain, nature motor, functions rotation of eyeball. Then trigeminal divided into 3, ophthalmic, maxillary and mandibular. Ventral surface of pons varoli, mixed movement of tongue, jaw muscles for chewing. Then abducens, lateral side of medulla, motor rotation of eyeball, facial, side and floor of medulla, mixed taste, facial expressions, chewing movement of neck. Then auditory, lateral side of medulla oblongata, sensory, hearing and equilibrium. Glossopharyngeal, lateral side of medulla oblongata, mixed type, taste and touch movements, swallowing of pharynx. Movements of pharynx, swallowing in case of food. Then vagus, lateral side of medulla oblongata, mixed type, vocal cords, sound production, lungs, respiratory reflexes, peristaltic movements, speech, swallowing, secretion of gastric glands, inhibition of heartbeat. Then spinal accessory nerves, floor of medulla, lateral side of medulla oblongata, motor, muscles of pharynx, larynx, neck, shoulder movements. Then hypoglossal, floor of medulla, then ventral side of medulla oblongata, then motor in the sense movements of tongue region. So we learned about vagus nerve, right? Vagus nerve is the longest and trochlear is the smallest cranial nerve. Trochlear is the smallest one. Next is about autonomic nerve system. Autonomic nerve system regulates the activities of involuntary smooth muscle, cardiac muscles and glands without consulting the will. The system is entirely motor, having efferent fibers. The system consists of preganglionic fibers from central nervous system, ganglia and postganglionic fibers. It is also called the visceral nervous system because the autonomic nervous system innervates the viscera. It consists of 2 antagonistic components, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Autonomic nervous system regulates the activities of involuntary muscle, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle and glands without consulting the will. The system is entirely motor, having efferent fibers. The system consists of preganglionic fibers from central nervous system, ganglia and postganglionic fibers. It is also called visceral nerve system because the autonomic nerve system innervates the viscera. It consists of 2 antagonistic components. Antagonistic in the sense they are just opposite functions performing. Sympathetic and parasympathetic. Effect of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the autonomic nerve system. Target organ is digestive system, and we try to consider the effect of parasympathetic system. You could see increases smooth muscle mobility. Increases smooth muscle mobility or peristalsis and amount of secretion by digestive system glands. Relaxes sphincters. And we consider the effect of parasympathetic system. Increase smooth muscle mobility or peristalsis and amount of secretion by digestive system glands. Relaxes sphincters. But sympathetic effect decrease activity of digestive system and constricts digestive system sphincters. For example, anal sphincter. Earlier we learned a point which states the sympathetic system is the fight or flight system. Along with that, parasympathetic system is a system which is actually related to rest and digest system. So all the effects should be related to that. So digestive system will be in a rest and digest phase in the parasympathetic effect. Okay. So liver, no effect, causes glucose to be released to blood, because when we are going to fight, we need glucose. Even when we are going to flight, that also require glucose in the blood. Then lungs, constricts bronchioles, dilates bronchioles, because a great amount of oxygen is to be taken in, and because of that. Then urinary bladder or urethra relaxes sphincters, allows voiding, but constricts sphincters, prevents voiding. Kidneys, no effect, decrease urine output. Heart, decreases rate, shows and steadies, but increase rate and force of heartbeat. Then blood vessels, no effect on most blood vessels, constricts blood vessels in viscera and skin, dilates those in skeletal muscle and heart, increases blood pressure. Glands, salivary glands, shows effects which are related to stimulates, increases production of saliva and tear, inhibits, results in dry mouth and dry eyes. Iris region, stimulates constrictor muscles, constricts pupils, stimulate dilator muscles, dilate pupil. Eye, ciliary muscle, stimulates to increase bulging of lens for close vision. Inhibits decreased bulging of lens, prepares for distant vision. Then adrenal medulla, no effect, stimulates medulla cells to secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine. Then sweat glands for skin, no effect, stimulates to produce perspiration. Then arrectopili muscles attached to hair follicles, no effect, stimulates produce goosebumps. Arrectopili muscles attached to hair follicles. Penis, causes erection due to vasodilation, causes ejaculation, emission of semen. Then cellular metabolism, no effect, increased metabolic rate, increased blood sugar level, stimulates fat breakdown. Next, we are going to learn about the sensory organs. So the eyes are complex sense organs. Eyes are complex sense organs. Each eye has a layer of receptors, a lens system that focuses light on these receptors, and a system of nerves that conduct impulses from the receptors. When we try to learn about the anatomy of the eyeball, the human eye can also be divided into two main segments, the anterior segment and the posterior segment. The anterior segment of the eye include the structures cornea, iris, ciliary body, and lens. Aqueous humor fills the space within the anterior segment. Anterior segment has two chambers, anterior chamber between cornea and iris, and posterior chamber between iris, sonula, fibers, and lens. Okay. Then posterior segment includes vitreous chamber between the lens and the retina. The aqueous humor brings nutrients to the cornea and to the lens, and it removes the products of metabolism from them. Vitreous chamber between the lens and the retina. The vitreous humor is a gelatinous mass that helps maintain the shape of the eye while allowing it to remain somewhat pliable. So we could see the structure of iris. Conjunctiva is there. Just remember the disease called conjunctivitis. Okay, conjunctiva, that name is derived from this conjunctiva region. Cornea, lens, anterior chamber, ciliary body, ciliary muscle, vitreous humor. Then fovea centralis, retina, choroid, sclera. This is a schematic representation of a horizontal section of the left eye. So when we try to learn about the portions, iris, conjunctiva, cornea, lens, anterior chamber, ciliary body, ciliary muscle, vitreous humor, fovea centralis, retina, choroid, and sclera. Fovea centralis, retina, innermost portion, choroid, sclera. Ciliary muscle is there, ciliary body, anterior chamber, vitreous humor, lens, cornea, conjunctiva, and iris. Okay. The lens is bathed on one side by aqueous humor and supported on the other side by vitreous humor. It has no blood supply but is metabolically active. The lens is bathed on one side by aqueous humor and supported by the other side by vitreous humor. It has no blood supply. It is metabolically active. It obtains nutrients from the aqueous humor. The lens is mostly water and proteins. The majority of vertebrate lens proteins are the alpha, beta, and gamma crystallins. Anatomically, the wall of the eyeball consists of 3 layers: fibrous tunic, vascular tunic, and retina. The fibrous tunic is a superficial coat of the eyeball and consists of the anterior cornea and posterior sclera. The cornea is a transparent coat that covers the colored iris. We will be learning this after some time.